Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LITrpg Podcast. I'm Ramon Mejia, here to bring you the latest LITrpg news, reviews, and of course author interviews. This week I have 6 new reviews for you folks at home. That's going to include Planet Hero Sidekick, which is the second book in that series, The Good Guys Book 11, the 11th book in that series, Tartila Mine, then Alpha Physics, and also Star Tower and Cooldown. So we have 6 reviews for you folks at home. But before we get into that, well, actually, there's no LITrpg news, so we're probably just going to go into stuff that's out now. But here's some music. I guess there maybe is some LITrpg news. We're going to be going to Dragon Con this year. It is still going on. It's going to be in the beginning of September. So if you're a LITrpg person and you want to do a meetup, or I know some other LITrpg authors are going to be going to that, feel free to come find us and hang out. We'll give you more details when we get there. But I know I'll be going personally at least, and representing LITrpg. Hopefully there are going to be some LITrpg booths, we can do some filming, and as per usual, I'll be recording left and right to share all the great cosplay and stuff. So, LITrpg news, yay! On to stuff that's out now. Okay, so it's out now. This is a little bit of a lengthy list, just because it's been a couple weeks between recordings. But Awaken Online Hellion is out, as is the 4th book in the NPC's Path series. Towers and Risk book number 2 is out. The first book in the Jeff the Game Master series is out. Another online book number 2 is out. The 4th book in the Factory of God series is out. 4th book in the Project Stellar book series is out. 3rd book in the Cyphercraft book series is out. A new book from Portalbooks called Ether Frontier is out. Beta Testers book number 6. Magnus book number 1. Necrotic Apocalypse book number 2. I actually enjoyed book number 1. Kind of a fun zombie apocalypse series. Also out is Underdog book number 6. And also the 3rd, and I think this is the last book in the Punic War series, which is a Roman LITrpg series. Also out is The Range book number 2. Currently reading this one. He Who Fights with Monsters book number 2. Enjoying it. Also out is Discardium book number 7, as is Arcana Unlocked book number 2. The second book in the Alpha LITrpg series called Alpha Ascent is out. It's another Russian LITrpg series. Also out is Heistmaster, as is another book from Wolflock, Apocalypse Hero. Also out is, I was reincarnated as a farmer. So that's an interesting title. Also out is Dungeon of Change, Double or Nothing, the second book in the Serious Probability series, as is the second book in the Whispering Crystal series. In new audiobooks, we got a nice hunky, chunky list here as well. The first book in the Pocket Cosmos series, Berserker. The second book in the Overdrive series, He Who Fights with Monsters book number 2 is out as an audiobook as well as an ebook at the same time. The 9th book in the Dragonheart series is out. Third book in Elemental Dungeons is out. Blasphemy Online book number 2. Also, the Dungeon Arcanist Cookbook, Dungeon Crawler Carl book number 3, which is super funny just on its own. The audiobook version of it is apparently dialed up to 11 with their really well done voice cast. Also out as an audiobook at the same time as the ebook is Revenant, the second book in the Necrotic Apocalypse series. Also out as an audiobook is They Call Me Mad, which is the second book in that series. The third book in the Arcane Ascension series is out as an audiobook. Underworld book number 6 by the amazing Paul Sorn is out as an audiobook. Bad Guys series book number 6 is out as an audiobook. The new story, Terra Nova, is out as an audiobook. Nova Terra, which is a different series, also out as an audiobook, which is the 4th book in the Titan series. Beast Realms book number 2 is out. Jeff the Game Master, like I mentioned, the ebook is out. Audiobook is out as well at the same time. Player Reaches for the Top book number 4 is out as an audiobook. The 6th book in the Realm of Teen series is out. Small Unit Tactics book number 2, audiobook. Towers of Heaven book number 3 is an audiobook. And finally, Apocalypse Hero out as an audiobook. So all kinds of stuff for you guys to enjoy, whether it's ebooks or audiobooks out for you to enjoy. Stuff that's coming out in the near future. Starting with May 24th, it'll be the second book in the gamified series, Player vs. Player. A new series called Feast Bounty. On May 24th, it'll be The Price of Power. May 25th, Hexworld, which is a book from Kevin J. Anderson. May 27th, the third book in the Apocalyptic series is going to be out. May 28th is the fifth book in the Bow Knight series, called A Daring Plan and a Cold Shoulder. On May 28th, the second book in the Sage series called Myriad Stars. May 30th, Intellectium book number 2. May 31st, it'll be the Dungeon Slayers book number 3. May 31st, the fourth book, I think it is, in the World Domination series, the Supervision LITrpg series. On June 1st, it'll be Trial, a Superhero LITrpg. On June 1st, Warlock Chronicles book number 3. June 1st as well, Beastborn Chronicles book number 3. June 4th, Rogue Merchant book number 6. June 7th, Second Shot Fantasia book number 1. June 8th, Defiance of the Fall. On June 8th, it'll be The Weight of It All, the third book in that series. On June 15th, this is a new spin-off series in the Viridian Gate Online universe called the Heartfire Healer series. On June 22nd, it'll be Terrarium Online, Undiscovered Country, a new series. On June 25th, the second book in the Shatterfist book series, also called the Retired S-Rec Adventurer series. On June 29th, Primacy Online, book number 6. June 30th, True John Crusade, Dark Fantasy GameLit. This is actually, I want to say book 2 or book 3 in this series. It doesn't say on the cover art, though. On June 30th, it'll be the second volume of the Tower Ruin series. June 30th, The Good Guys, book number 12 by the amazing Eric Uggland. On July 1st, the fourth book in the Everbone series. July 1st, it'll be the third book in the Overtake Online series. July 1st, Dungeon Crawler Carl, book number 4. Looking forward to that one. On July 2nd, the Sleepless Ones, book number 7. On July 12th, Dinosaur Dungeon, book number 2. World of Magic, book number 1 will be out on July 13th. July 20th, Hexworld, book number 2. July 20th, They Call Me Matter. July 27th, Frostworld, Ice and Blood. July 27th, Player Reaches the Top, book number 6. July 30th, Still in Tower Shadows, which is another book from Warlock. So there, all kinds of stuff coming out in the near future. On to new releases and reviews. Okay, first up this week is going to be Planet Hero Sidekick, written by M.A. Carlson. This is the second book in this Planet Hero series. It is 253 pages, $2.99. It's available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. So you want to fight crime, save people from villains, be the good guy? If the answer is yes to all these questions, then the life of a sidekick just might be for you. Warning, not responsible for potential death or dismemberment. Davis might come to regret the day he decided to become a sidekick, but now that he has already put in the time to complete the certification program, he was going to see it through. But first, he needs to survive in the world for a couple of weeks with his fellow wannabe sidekicks. Nothing like teen angst and drama to make a man fill his ears. If he succeeds and makes it as a sidekick, he gets to look forward to working with the cantankerous Hammerjack, a hero of some repute. Though whether that is good or bad is yet to be determined. The time has come for Davis to embrace his new life and take his place on Planet Hero as a lowly sidekick. So there we go. Full disclosure, I received advanced copy for review. I purchased a copy when it became available. This is the second entry into the Superhero LITrpg series, and the beginning, half at least, seems to really draw from a popular animated Superhero Academy series, and with the main character being kind of dropped in this group of teen psychic potentials, and they all go on this like test and training session, and it very much is like Hero Academy, and I think the author did a little bit too good of a job in describing the teens, because they're all super annoying as heck, as teenagers are. So for me, that portion where a full-on grown adult is with these teenagers doing these training missions and doing this sidekick test, the sidekick qualification test, was annoying, because I'm like, you're a grown man. I feel like there's an alternative way for you to become a psychic besides going through the, teenage recruitment test. But it's there as setup for things that happen in the second part of the book. So I understand why it exists. I definitely I understand the vibe of pulling from My Hero Academy. But the second half of the story is much better because those teens don't really exist for it. And I thought the story was much better without them, because I found them to be personally annoying. And maybe that's just credit to the author in describing teenagers. But like, just their comments and the dumb decisions they made just was not working for me. The other parts of the story, very well done, nice action, good power up system. I really enjoyed the main character's power set and the way he uses them intelligently. All that stuff is really good. I don't have any qualms with the main character. It's other characters that kind of just made that first half a little bit of annoying. So the also I really actually enjoyed. There's a second narrative story that's weaved through this, that's going back to the start of the nano apocalypse, when there's this shifting. It actually goes back to like the instance of like the first nanos that appear on Earth and rapidly swarm the planet for the RPG Apocalypse. Mutating monsters, giving humans, superhero powers, or killing them outright, kind of depending on what happens, and changing and destroying the world as humanity knows it. And it was a really enjoyable break between the main storyline, just so you could see how the history of this world. And I really actually enjoyed that storyline a bit more than the first half of this, just because it was very RPG Apocalypse, and I'm much more drawn towards that section, because it did a justice to it, in that there were just like terrible human beings taking advantage of the situation, monsters to fight, and people who are going past certain issues to help others and to expand their powers and doing what it needs to do to survive and help humanity. And that story is a little more grittier than just the straight superhero story that you see in the main storyline. Overall, I still had a good time with the story. If you like superhero stories and you like LITrpg, this might be like the perfect mix of everything for you. The story loses a little bit for me, just because I just plain disliked some of the early teen characters in the first half of the story. But the other stuff was still very enjoyable, but it does lose because I didn't mind. I wouldn't have mind seeing those teens just get killed off. And that's that's not, I don't think that was the intent of the author necessarily. So that just didn't work for me necessarily, but overall, still enjoyable story. This gets a few decimals off. Gets a score of 7.5 out of 10. 7.5 is just dead center in the middle of oh, this is good. It's not doing anything super amazing, not doing something too terrible. Just 7.5 is dead center, mid good. This one is at 7.4, just because okay, there are things in it that were just slightly annoying, but it wasn't unenjoyable enough that it drops any more than that. So for other people who didn't dislike the teen characters, probably super fine. But for me, it gets a score of 7.4 out of 10. That's Planet Hero Sidekick. And I still enjoyed it. Okay, next up is Killing Them Awfully, a LITrpg GameLit adventure, The Good Guys, book number 11, written by Eric Uglin. It is 388 pages, $4.99, available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. He's tried to ignore them for too long, but the long simmering conflict between Montana's holding at Conchshell and the night goblins who also apply the valley is about to boil over. Usually, goblins aren't anything to write home about, an enemy without much size, intellect, or weaponry. But these goblins, well, that's just not the case. These are goblins with limitless resources, never-before-seen tactics, and horrifying monsters at their disposal. Worst of all, they don't fear death in the slightest. They just might force a good guy to become what he's always struggled to defeat. killing them awfully. Oh, so there you go. That's pretty much it. This story really feels like an extension of the last book, book number 10. It was a very fine length, but it felt rushed in dealing with like the demon holiday thing, and it in resolving some storylines a little abruptly. This really felt like an extension because it does take place. It starts immediately after the next day of the end of the last book, and it continues a storyline conflict that is expanded out. The stuff with the goblins really does come to a head, and some readers really thought that element of them becoming so overpowered so quickly was kind of out of left field, and I can understand some of their complaints on that. For me, I'm like, I feel like, oh, they've been built up enough where it's like, it is a bit of a stretch. And I feel like that's something that's going to be explored in like book 12 or 13, whatever. But it was just such a cool obstacle, such a cool fights that I can kind of overlook it in my enjoyment of just like the action that was a result of this like gigantic, event that happens in the story. So this story really does have a ton of action. And again, this was very big battles that I really enjoyed, and some good storytelling that I liked. Like, and there are some issues of like, that seemed to escalate with them pretty quickly. There are, when looking back at the series, you're like, oh, okay, you can see some seeds kind of dropped here and there about their potential as an enemy. But it really, I don't think it was developed enough to necessarily justify for some readers. But for me, it was like, you know what, these battles were just cool enough where like, nah, I can overlook that a little bit. I'm not, with the assumption that it is going to be explained in like the next book, book 12 or whatever. So for me, still had a good time with it. Almost great. 7.8 out of 10. Really good story though. Always enjoyed every single one of the books in the series. So that's going to be Killing Them Awfully, The Good Guys, book number 11, with a score of 7.8 out of 10. Okay, next up is going to be the Tartila Mine, The Alchemist, book number 5, by Basilim Henko. It is 297 pages, $6.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. And here's the author's description. What are you supposed to do when the whole world joins forces against you? Give up? Find some hole to duck into and beg for your life to be spared? But even despite how obvious the answer to the question might be, many an adult had been dashed on the rocks 12-year-old Talon Vasilich was supposed to climb. Ahead of him lay a secret laboratory belonging to the ancients. Behind was a horde heading to his sworn enemy. But through it all, Talon had those who loved him, those who believed in him, and that support was enough to carry him to the ends of the earth. There was just one question left to answer. Who was the Absorber, and what did he want with Talon? Okay. Full disclosure, I received a Ben's copy for you. I purchased a copy when it became available. I feel like this is the conclusion to the Alchemist series. Not necessarily the end of the adventures to this character. Just like it was an end of the adventures of the, connecting series. And the story has a lot of action adventure. I enjoyed it. There are some teasers from previous book or two that are fulfilled here. The entire storylines are all wrapped up here. There's some good battles. I think that made this a little bit more enjoyable for me was that I read the author of the series. So seeing those teasers, and seeing like the cameo, like fairly, big cameo from another character into this series, and seeing how everything's connecting, I was like, oh, okay, that kind of made it a little extra special. So for me, gets a score of 7.8 out of 10. All the regular enjoyment I have with the series, plus a little slight bump up, just because of the cameo that's connecting another series by the author that I've already really enjoyed, and seeing that fulfilled out and fleshed out, and it's not just like the stupid, 2-minute, cameo like, hey, I'm here and goodbye. There's a significant chunk of the story that is involved with this character, and it leads to like the ultimate resolution of like the big series. So I enjoyed that extra development. It connected another story that I already enjoyed. So gets a score 7.8 out of 10 from, again, the Tartila Mine, The Alchemist, book number 5, which is a Russian translation series. Okay, next up is Alpha Physics, book number 1, Wagga, a LITrpg Apocalypse, Change Earth Progressant Fantasy. It is 370 pages, $6.99, available on Kindle Limited. Here's the author's description. In the apocalypse, the first weapon we'll have to upgrade is himself. The end of the world as we know it couldn't come at a worse time for Adrian. One minute, he's an operations manager who's overseeing a construction job in the wilderness. The next, an unknown energy force changes the very nature of life itself. From the smallest organism to the top of the food chain, the Earth's surviving inhabitants, its environment, and the very laws of physics have all undergone fundamental transformations. Many of those changes aren't pretty. Plenty of them are deadly. Luckily for Earth, this has happened to other species before, and everyone receives an interface that survivors of similar events have used to navigate through an alien apocalypse, alien landscape. Adrian's going to need every advantage he can get. He's stranded in the middle of nowhere. There are days, maybe weeks of travel between him and his family. In a world full of monsters and mayhem, survival means beating the learning curve. So there we go. It's a little wordy, but he does a good job of describing the setup for the series. It's an RPG Apocalypse story. First book in the series. It is set in Australia. So it's an Australian RPG Apocalypse series. So it actually does a good job of doing all those things. The beginning is a little off-putting, mostly because I think the author is just kind of trying to find his writing legs, I guess. But once it actually gets to the RPG Apocalypse, once that is actually the interface, the RPG class system is explored, and the main character is actually doing some fighting and some adventuring, the story is entertaining and it continues on to be. But the beginning is a little boring. And that's mostly because, not necessarily because of the main character or his setup, that I think is done well, but once that the apocalypse happens, like the impetus of that, the main character does like this weird, he's kind of supposed to be a blue mage in power setup, not necessarily in a set class, but he, in his introduction to the system, he goes to these weird and honestly boring scenarios of where he's an RPG monster, and he's going through their life and supposed to be learning something from, but the descriptions are so tedious. I was like, this is not good, and I generally thought of like putting it down, but I'm glad I didn't, because it's overall a very entertaining story once the main character gets out of that section. You never see that type of learning thing again, really, where he's like where you're just kind of in this cutaway of this animal, and how its powers work and how it's interacting with things like that. It's very much like this thing in the beginning portion of the story where it's like, I've just found it annoying and unnecessary. But the story thankfully gets away from that, and his power to becomes different as he progresses his story, and it very much is like this blue mage power system, which I appreciated, and that it has this opportunity for growth potentially, but he does have to work really hard to practice and understand what he's seeing through his RPG interface and through his analysis of like the magical energies of the various monsters that he's killing and absorbing. So I liked the game mechanics. I liked the RPG Apocalypse system. It is going to be a mixed bag for some readers, just because it isn't consistent between what the main character has and what everybody else. So there seems to be this two-tiered system where some people just get a straight class system, and the author really good at describing way of describing why it's different for different people. So I can appreciate the depth of it. But it does definitely feel like two different systems. One is very class oriented, where it's like, oh, somebody gets a simple system, they get simple power sets, it's very progressive, they can see how it's going. And they go level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10, whatever the case is. For the main character and some other characters in story, they have a very advanced system where they don't necessarily get like easy level up bumps, but in exchange they get really interesting potential powers that aren't necessarily just in a class. They don't necessarily have a class system where it's like, oh, you're a paladin, you're a rogue. Instead, they get a much broader set of potential skills, but it's much harder for them to level. And I feel like that was a good trade-off, but it does feel like, again, two kind of separate systems necessarily, or like a variety of systems for some players. But still very interesting. Had a good time with it. The RPG Apocalypse side of things in the story, it's the monsters are there. The apocalypse is there, and that they're electricity that's necessary to work and other like set systems. So people are starting over, having to go back to basics of fighting for their lives, for survival, and against monsters, and like shelter and food to a good degree. But it wasn't necessarily so apocalyptic that I felt like there was this like necessarily terrible threat. It wasn't a super dark RPG apocalypse. It's very much along the lines of in the setting of this world and the story, people are pretty decent, and I was slightly annoyed at that because I know in real life like people would be jerks, or maybe this is because I'm American and the story is set in Australia. In Australia, maybe people are just a lot nicer and they're a lot more cooperative. And so from the author's point of view, that seems very reasonable. But I guess I'm an American and I watch too much Walking Dead or Fear of the Walking Dead, and everyone seems to be terrible. Like the good people die off fairly quickly from all the bad stuff that happens. And so that's generally my point of view of like what I expect from the apocalypse side of things, at least some of that existing in the world where you see people are terrible and you see them taking advantage. And that's kind of the norm that you fight against. And you find a much rarer opportunity for good people to survive. So on that side of things are like, okay, that is what it is. It didn't quite meet my expectation on the apocalypse side of things. But overall, still a good time. They had good fights, good system stuff. And I think most LITrpg reviewers are going to really enjoy this, and they seem to have, based upon reviews of the story. So for me, it gets a score of 7.7 out of 10. Almost great, just again, loses a little bit just on the RPG, on the apocalypse side of things, and on some of the inconsistencies in the game mechanics, and that everybody in the world doesn't necessarily have the same system, and it is fairly well explained why, but that there are differences for me was like, okay, I can't count on the things I learn from the main character's RPG system necessarily be applied to other people's. So there's that for me, and that is a thing for me and some other readers potentially. But overall, again, really entertaining, really good. Gets a 7.7 out of 10, which is a really good review score rather. That's Alpha Physics, book number 1, Wagga, with a score of 7.7 out of 10. And next up we have Starred System Misinterpret, book number 1, a post-apocalyptic cultivation LITrpg story, written by Ryan DeRun. It is 514 pages, $5.49. It's available on Kindle Limited, and here's the author's description. An apocalypse, an epic change in biology. Humanity's new powers, no extractions, so everyone created their own. Born over a century after the rise, Jeff scavenges with his tyrannical mother for survival. Banned from cultivating freely, Jeff wants none of this life. His one objective is to join the immortal Rankers as they attempt to climb the northern tower. On the day of his escape, a powerful guild attacks Leah's group, and Jeff is thrown through a unique dungeon portal, a portal that hasn't been used for nearly 100 years. In the pursuit of Jeff's ultimate goal, he must choose whether to follow the church, join a party, and try it on his own. Predators don't only come from dungeons, and he must dig through the mountains of misinformation for one straight answer. When spells and skills unleash chaos, a special blue screen powers up, and Jeff's journey to the peak or the grave begins. So there we go. Full disclosure, I see advanced copy for review. I purchased a copy when it became available. The first 10% of the story doesn't feel anything like LITrpg. That does change at a certain point in the story, and it is a bit confusing as to why, honestly, the first 10% is necessary at all in the story, because it has a different main character. The first 10% of the story has a female, overpowered, super powerful female character, and there is a little bit of backstory in how the world has shifted from what we know to this RPG, not even RPG apocalypse, but cultivation apocalypse world with a tower climbing that doesn't actually have an impact on our main character story. But there's a bit of history with flying towers and floating towers and the rest of humanity trying to scrape by. So there is some world building setup in that first 10%, but it doesn't have any payoff in this story for the other 90%. It really is like background information for the main character's mother, which isn't honestly super clear. in when he's introduced this, right? Because when we're introduced to the main character after that first little setup, he's a teen. I think he's like 14, 15 years old. He's like, I'm super not close to my mom, who, if she is my mom really, because I don't really know. And she seems to hate him and alternatively protective of him. And so there is some background of like why that's the case. And once you get into the actual main character, who's a teenage kid with pointy ears, who's again been forbidden from cultivation for, it's eventually explained why. And it becomes, his detriment becomes his greatest asset kind of thing. But it's not really until after the 11% mark when the main character is separated from that group and he falls into this I'm gonna say dungeon, but it is essentially an RPG training room. So it's a little spoiler, but it's in the cover art, where he get the RPG aspect of it and get the RPG system where it becomes actual LITrpg. So for the first 10% of it, straight cultivation, straight a little bit of RPG Apocalypse mixed in a little bit, and I found it to be annoying because most of it didn't feel necessary for getting to the main character, for introducing. So if you find yourself struggling a little bit with that in the beginning of the story, you're like, where's the RPG coming in? In the first 50 pages. It does happen. It does eventually, and once that does hit, it is for the other like 90% of the story. So just push through it if you need to, because the rest of it is very entertaining. Once you get to the main character and gets the RPG stuff, he gets that separate training room where it's a hidden safe subspace area that gives him quests and rewards and helps him stronger. There's lots of notifications that make the story feel more game-like with RPG interfaces, quests, stat increases, and a good portion of that middle section of it is him, just doing like exercises and doing quests, so like cooking and growing from this dependent, confused teen to becoming an independent adult to a degree, and learning about the larger world that he's kind of been hidden away from in these survivor enclaves. So he's introduced to like these other people that his mother had hidden him away from for an explained reason that's there. And so there is a bit of like him exploring the larger world, which is what all, teens become growing up should do. So there is a bit of a, young adult, growing up kind of story thing going on there. And again, with the exception of a few other cutscenes, you stick with this character. So he goes to his first city. He learns just how cruel the world can be as he tries to kill it in for the first time. So there's also an emphasis on the dark cruelty of this post-apocalyptic world, which I enjoyed. And there's dungeon diving, there's RPG progressions, some cultivation, and some decent fighting. Overall, it's really rather good. The beginning again was a little off-putting for me. But overall, after that 11% mark, I fully dived into it and really enjoyed it. So for me, it gets a score 7.8 out of 10. Again, loses just a little bit just because that beginning was it could have been done a different way. It would have been a little more enjoyable. So it was off-putting for me. Other people probably wouldn't care. But for me, it gets a score 7.8 out of 10, which is a really good, enjoyable score for me. That's Star Tower System Misinterpret book number 1, post-apocalyptic Cultivation LITrpg, with scores again 7.8 out of 10. Nearly a great story. Okay, next up is going to be Cooldown, Unfrozen book number 1, LITrpg series, written by Anton Tekshin. This is a Russian translation story. It is 535 pages, $3.09. It's available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. If you're going to stick your hand into somebody else's refrigerator, you better be ready to deal with the consequences. Especially when instead of perishable foodstuff, the icebox in question contains people who are provisionally alive. That's such a confusing paragraph. They haven't died yet. Death has not made them up its mind about them. And even though most of them will never open their eyes, the lucky few do stand the ghost of a chance of returning to this world. What a pity that among these fortunate souls there is one man who thought his earthly affairs concluded for all eternity. His case file bristles with cautionary attributes such as serial killer, extremist, and mentally unstable. And yet, Could this be the best candidate for an assignment that has already claimed the lives of several veteran operators? Who knows? Wow, that is not a particularly great description of this novel, I'll be honest. That is the setup for like maybe the introduction of what happens in the first, I don't know, 5% of the story. This is a Russian translation story whose story puts up a vigilante investigator into cryostasis instead of being killed by corrupt officials. He wakes up 24 years later and is tasked with going into a full immersion space virtual reality MMO to solve the locked door room mystery murder of a prominent clan member of the game. That's the actual like setup of the story. Like there's the novel does absolutely nothing to tell you how this is LITrpg. It is though. However, in practice, even though that is the setup, this is really just a slice of life story. The main character adventures, tries to gain as many achievements to catch the attention of the clans as he can, and pops out of game occasionally to update his employer and plan what goals he has in game. There is a little bit of intrigue in the story, but generally it's an interesting and action-ish adventure with a survival sabotage game mode in the last like 25% of the story. So mostly this is a slice of life, science fiction, like space, virtual reality MMO kind of game, kind of story. The story around it in the real world with him being a vigilante detective, I guess it's entertaining on its own, at least. But it's mostly just there to kind of justify him being like thrown into the future where this technology exists, and kind of like direct his actions a little bit in game, and then giving him purpose. Like, oh, you have to like do these really hard quests and do these, try to get these achievements because we're trying to get you into the clan so you can investigate this thing. And although none of that really matters by the end of the story, it does like direct him a little bit more than just, him wanting to, game because, but not much more. Again, most of the story is just him being in this like space opera virtual reality MMO, figuring out what kind of character he wants to be and going on some adventures. Sometimes he's in a ship, sometimes he's on planet, doing these quests and stuff. And ultimately it still is entertaining. It really is. It's just that the real life stuff, it's all of it doesn't matter. But I didn't expect it to, and I've read worse. Like, that's kind of what it comes down to. The real life storyline is, if it was just on of its own, it would be a science fiction kind of cyberpunk thing. And it would be entertaining on its own. It's not badly written or anything, but it has very little to do with the purpose of the virtual reality MMO exploration. It just kind of sits there as like this, occasion, like I'm popping up back to the real world, and my handler is like, okay, good job there. Let's get you back in it because, things aren't going well for us, and we need to figure out a way to get into the clan to figure out the murders, except that ultimately it doesn't matter. It really is just like, kind of just a way to direct him towards particular quests and stuff and reasons for him to do it. On the game mechanic side of things, really good. Like, it really is. Like, the author goes out of his way to describe classes and descriptions and weapon descriptions and the game mechanics and decipher reasons for it and all the different classes and abilities and how they kind of cooperate or one's overpowered and one's not in particular situations. And they're on the quests themselves. We're getting lots of notifications and very interesting quests. It in some ways it feels like a series of short stories in the virtual reality side of things, where the main character is going on these adventures, and they're entertaining. They're interesting. On their own, that would be entertaining as well. And it's not bad. It's just like, oh, okay, it is what it is. It really, for the most part, is a slice of life story. The main character is in a virtual reality MMO world, and the game setting is space opera stuff, where he's trying to do these like outrageous adventures and outrageous achievements on purpose. And so there was a bit of a motivation for him to be outlandish and not just take a safe path of grinding out quests necessarily. And so but that's what it is. It's not super amazing in that there's no real cohesion of plot here. And yet overall still pretty decent. I've read worse setups of why someone has to go into virtual reality world to grind a character. That's kind of what it is. So for me, entertaining still. I don't know that I would read a second book just because of the ending of this first book, but you know, if you have nothing else to read, this is fairly decent. Gets a score of 7.4 out of 10. Again, not amazing. Just like fairly, it's like slightly less than middle of the road good. But overall, I'm like, okay, I wouldn't regret purchasing it. For me, it's kind of a one-off in that it was entertaining enough to keep me going, but nothing particularly like super special. That's Cooldown, Unfrozen, book number 1 with the score of 7.4 out of 10. Okay, that is it for the show. Thank you very much for listening, for watching to the LITrpg podcast. I'm going to have some links on the show notes where you can always follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Patreon, our webpage, Spotify. You can also listen to the podcast on Spotify and Audible now. We've expanded our presence. Also some links in the show notes or some other LITrpg groups where you can authors and readers meet and get recommendations or just share memes about bacon or puns. And there's also a link in the show notes for where you can support the podcast, help us keep us free and ad free, help keep the podcast going, and we can save you some dough, hopefully, on finding good books and winning some bad ones. But thanks again, folks, for hanging out with me this week. And until we can hang out again, remember to go read some LITrpg. Goodbye, everybody.